On this Sunday night, Saudi Arabia takes aim at Canada, declaring Canada's ambassador persona non grata and giving him 24 hours to get out. How a tweet advocating for a jailed blogger and his sister seems to have sparked a diplomatic dispute. Also, a drone attack targets the Venezuelan president, but just who was behind this alleged assassination attempt? And as a deadly tornado barreled towards a small Manitoba community, a warning went out. So why didn't residents get the message? This is The National. Canada's ambassador to Saudi Arabia now has less than 24 hours to leave that country. The Saudi kingdom is also lashing out at Canada on the trade front, suspending all new trade and investment deals. The CBC's Catherine Cullen is in Toronto tonight and has more on these developments. And Catherine, let's begin with why this is happening.
Well, Ian, Saudi Arabia is angry that Canada has called for the release of two human rights activists with Canadian connections. On Thursday, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister sent out this tweet. Very alarmed to learn that Samir Badawi, Raif Badawi's sister, has been imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. Canada stands together with the Badawi family in this difficult time, and we continue to strongly call for the release of both Raif and Samir Badawi. Now, a Global Affairs Department Twitter account also condemned more broadly the arrest of civil society and women's rights activists and called for their immediate release. This has apparently outraged Saudi officials, who mentioned in a statement today that they were also briefed by Chrystia Freeland on this. And the result of all of it is that they're recalling their ambassador, kicking out the Canadian ambassador, and freezing trade relations. Now, Saudi Arabia has tweeted that Canada's comments are a violation of Saudi sovereignty and that calling for the immediate release of activists is very unfortunate, reprehensible, and unacceptable.
Okay, let's focus now on the activist whose arrest has set all of this off.
Well, of the two, Raif Badawi is the one who might be better known to Canadians. His wife and children now live in Quebec and recently became Canadian citizens, and his case has been taken up internationally. There have also been rallies here in Canada asking for his release. He is a Saudi blogger and human rights activist who was arrested in 2012 for being critical of the authorities. He's been lashed 50 times. His sister, Samir Badawi, is a women's rights activist who has been internationally recognized for her work. Here you see her receiving the International Women of Courage Award from Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama. She has been targeted by Saudi authorities before and was arrested last week along with another women's rights activist.
And put into perspective, Catherine, this move by the Saudi authorities.
Well, Ian, it is pretty remarkable. Pulling an ambassador or expelling another country's ambassador, it's a dramatic move. It's not really also all that unusual for countries like Canada to speak up about a human rights situation in another country, although often the language around it is a bit careful. In this case, it's interesting to note, though, that last year the Saudi ambassador did tell Canada to mind its own business on the Badawi case. Still, a reaction like this from Saudi Arabia, it is certainly a strong one.
All right, Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
We've asked the Canadian government for its reaction to the Saudi measures. So far, no response. Now, let's remember the Saudis are only threatening new business. Let's see where trade stands right now. Canada spends more on Saudi goods and services than vice versa. Last year, according to UN data, Saudi exports to Canada topped $2 billion US. Canadian exports to Saudi Arabia were less than $1.2 billion. Canada's best-known export to that country has been controversial, $15 billion worth of armored vehicles manufactured in Ontario. Critics say the Saudis use those vehicles to undermine human rights in places like Yemen. Well, let's move on to Venezuela, where tonight there are fears of a crackdown. 6 people have been arrested after that apparent assassination attempt on the country's president. As Keith Bogue reports, drones packed with explosives blew up during a military parade.
This is what Venezuelan TV showed at the moment of the blast. It sounds like the microphone's being cut off. A soldier on the platform appears to faint. The broadcast switches to a shot of soldiers in formation on the street. A moment later, a group seemingly dressed in black breaks through a barrier and appears to run from the right of the screen toward the soldiers, who, startled, panic and flee. It may be they are all fleeing the site of the explosion. This is what people at the event saw and heard. While soldiers in the street break formation and run, security on the platform surrounds President Nicolas Maduro.
Se escucharon unas detonaciones.
Later, in a nationally televised statement, Venezuela's vice president of communications says it was an attempted assassination by drone.
Tipo dron.
Aeronaves especiales.
Not this drone, says the Minister of the Interior, but two other drones, something like it. Outside an apartment building, people gawked at the scorch marks purportedly made by one of the drones when it crashed and exploded. Venezuela has been in turmoil for years as its economy disintegrates. It's brought people into the streets to protest against the government's economic management. Inflation is projected by the IMF to hit 1,000,000% this year. Maduro was re-elected to a 6-year term as president in May, in what the United Nations says was a process that did not meet even the minimum standards for free and credible elections. As the country descends deeper into its troubles, the government blames its neighbor Colombia and unspecified dissidents in the United States. About this latest incident, the U.S. National Security Advisor said,
"Well, I can say unequivocally there was no U.S. government involvement in this at all. If the government of Venezuela has hard information that they want to present to us that would show a potential violation of U.S. criminal law, we'll take a serious look at it."
And he took a moment to have a go at the Maduro government.
I think what we really should focus on is the corruption and the oppression of the Maduro regime in Venezuela.
And Keith is watching this story for us from our Washington bureau. There have been 6 arrests in this incident so far. So does that mean that the government's getting to the bottom of what happened?
Well, maybe it is, but there really isn't enough evidence to say that yet. And besides, as the government's opposition points out, it wouldn't be the first time that a regime feeling under threat has used a crisis like this one as a pretext for rounding up its opponents and not bothering to tell the people what really happened until later. Or maybe never.
So you pointed out the Venezuelan government is saying other countries are the real threat, and it does often point to the U.S. But is that something that people in Venezuela are likely to believe?
Well, it wouldn't be surprising if they do. Last summer, while chatting with reporters at his golf club, Donald Trump publicly threatened a military option for Venezuela. And since then, there have been reports that Trump has tried to feel out other Latin American countries, including Colombia, on the possibility of a U.S. invasion of Venezuela. So, at the very least, the Maduro government knows that making those kinds of allegations against the U.S. isn't going to seem ridiculous.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Ian.
Now to Western Canada, where there are nearly 300 wildfires burning in British Columbia. Firefighters here are waiting on help to arrive from the United States and Mexico, and as far away as Australia and New Zealand, one of the worst fires burning out of control in the southern Okanagan. Oh, this is the scene of the Snowy Mountain fire burning just 3 kilometers from the U.S. border. It was sparked by lightning a few weeks ago and has been tough to fight. Fire crews have to navigate those slopes and keep an eye out for rattlesnakes when they're on the ground, and they have to hope the weather cooperates. The CBC's Anita Bath got behind the fire lines today to see firsthand what crews are up against.
From the sky, the attack is on. Helicopters scooping up water from the Similkameen River. That's because on the ground, the fight is even more challenging for crews, facing steep terrain and high elevation.
The topography in this fire is very difficult for our crews to get a hold on. We have to be careful of where we put our firefighters.
It may be hard to tell, but almost the entire face of Snowy Mountain is on fire. 11,000 hectares, much of it is burning underground, with small plumes of smoke seen everywhere. Containing it is a must, so the strategy now behind the fire line, controlled burns to get rid of that dry grass and brush that can fuel the flames.
In certain conditions, there's just sort of no other move other than to move quickly with torches and light fires sort of near structures.
It's the best way, but imagine if your house was just meters away.
Even in this case, the firefighters were nervous as well, just based on the conditions that we were seeing and how volatile they were.
With flames essentially in their backyards, about 20 homes are at risk.
They got displaced during the floods. That was only a couple months ago. Now here we are with fires, and they're evacuated again. It has not been a good year for my Chappaqua residents.
So fire crews are doing whatever they can to save them, even attaching sprinklers to roofs.
Residents are uneasy. We had some structure loss yesterday. One of the homes lost one of the old sheds, and it's actually with their old cabin. And but their home was okay.
It's moments like this, though, that are keeping firefighters strong in their battle against the flames. Anita Bath, CBC News, Costin.
Meanwhile, people in southern Portugal have been left picking up the pieces after a wildfire tore through their town. Some 800 firefighters have been battling the blaze under suffocating conditions. At least 26 heat records across the country were shattered on Saturday, with some areas seeing temperatures as high as 46.8 degrees. A heat wave is gripping parts of Canada as well. Just weeks after scorching temperatures left at least 53 people dead in Montreal alone, parts of Quebec are once again in a hot zone, with daytime temperatures feeling like 40 degrees with the humidity. Simon Nakonechny tells us what's being done to make sure more lives aren't lost this time around.
Turn it off.
Hot or cold, when it comes to extreme temperatures, Montrealers tend to take things in stride.
Beginning of July, it was deadly, but you got used to it, to be honest.
It's the last day of Poutine Fest, so we had to come.
But for the city's most vulnerable, sweltering temperatures are more than just uncomfortable. They can be lethal. At the end of June, a heat wave descended on the city for 6 days. When it was all over, 53 people had died from heat-related causes. Officials don't see danger in the forecast this time, but say people need to take care if things drag on.
Our bodies reach a limit, especially if we're vulnerable. If I'm older or if I have a chronic disease, then my capacity to cope after a couple of days might be overcome.
Hua says those most at risk are men living alone without air conditioning. Homeless shelters are taking the lead.
Listen, it's hot, you're sweating, you don't look too good, just come inside. We'll give you some water, just take a break and go back, because you're like I said, you're going to collapse.
So far, local health authorities have not triggered a heat alert, but they're watching key indicators carefully, like the number of ambulance calls and deaths outside of hospitals. If things escalate, the city will keep pools and libraries open longer for people to cool off. Still, it's unlikely the scorching weather will deter most Montrealers from enjoying the outdoors. For a city that spends almost a third of the year covered in snow, this is what many live for. Simon Nakonechny, CBC News, Montreal.
We're watching several other developing stories tonight on The National, including in Indonesia, where the death toll from a powerful earthquake is approaching 100. It's the second quake to hit the region in a week. The quake hit the resort island of Lombok on Sunday evening local time. It was powerful, magnitude 7 and relatively shallow, lasting a few seconds, and witnesses say it was intense. When the shaking stopped, many people fled their dark, damaged homes. People in nearby Bali felt it too. Patients at this hospital had to be moved outside for fear of aftershocks. It's not clear what the full extent of the damage is yet, but officials say most victims were killed by falling debris. It's been a violent 24 hours in Chicago. 4 people killed and nearly 40 wounded in a string of shootings. In one incident, a group opened fire on a crowd of young people, wounding 8. Even so, police say shootings are actually down 25% in Chicago compared to last year. Jagmeet Singh is making a run for a seat in Parliament 10 months after becoming the leader of the NDP. The CBC has learned that Singh will be a candidate in the upcoming federal by-election in Burnaby South, just outside Vancouver. Singh hopes to replace outgoing NDP MP Kennedy Stewart. He resigned in July to run for mayor of Vancouver. We have a lot more still ahead on The National. They've been flooded with condolences for months. Now, as Humboldt prepares for a new hockey season, how the town is pulling together those messages of support. And a little later, the national interview with Milos Raonic, what the Canadian tennis star says about the challenges he faces going into the Rogers Cup. And we'll talk to the high school teacher who just shattered a world record for crossing the Atlantic.
I'm out, I'm rowing, I have waves crashing over my shoulder. Several times waves knocked me off my seat.
Let hockey heal. Been praying every night. If I could reverse time, I would. These are just a few of the messages sent to the community of Humboldt after that horrific crash last April. 16 people were killed, 13 others were hurt when that bus carrying the Humboldt Broncos junior hockey team collided with a semi-trailer. Now all of those thoughts and prayers that have poured into the community in the aftermath are being memorialized in a special exhibit. Olivia Stefanovic takes us there.
The usual quietness of a prairie summer has been anything but in Humboldt. The tragedy that claimed 16 lives 4 months ago still screams loudly. Main Street, decorated with green and gold, nearly every public space transformed into a show of strength.
Yesterday, from England.
Visitors are dropping in from around the world.
And there's a couple of noteworthy ones, Russia and Ethiopia.
They've turned Mike Yeager's usually slow season abuzz with the sound of hats being stitched, stickers printed, measured, and cut. Shiny logos unveiled just in time for the next customer.
Lots of people are telling us their story as to how they're either connected to the team, to a player, to hockey in general, to just sporting. Putting their kids on a bus or in a van.
But for all the Broncos memorabilia that goes out, just as much comes in.
It's an overwhelming amount, and each piece has value.
The city is showcasing the items.
So a lot of people have, expressed their condolences through a work of art, whether it's more of a community art piece. These are actual thumbprints of children.
Paintings, origami cranes from Ontario, banners all the way from Omaha, messages of support from around the globe. This is just a fraction of what's arrived, and things continue to pour in.
I personally feel it's heartwarming. Just what people have put into it and how it's helped our community, I think it makes you feel better.
But it can also be emotional. Along with artisanship, reminders of where to get help are on display.
It's been tough on a lot of people, but we're looking forward to, to get back to our everyday lives here.
That includes carrying on with the exhibit, rotating items so everything is shown in this place of reflection that people can turn to as they adapt to their new normal. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Humboldt, Saskatchewan.
It will be Dane Dow's first year with the team, but the Broncos' new goalie has come up with a unique way to remember those 16 people killed in the crash. Dow reached out to a custom mask creator to help design a piece of art that he'll wear on his helmet throughout the upcoming season.
The stripes and on the top and on the bottom all just kind of fell into place once I started designing it. And the biggest, most important part of the design is all the ghosted names in the background on the sides of the mask.
The names were done in pearlized paint and are only visible at certain angles in certain light, depending on which way Dow's head is turned. A Humboldt Strong ribbon is painted on one side of the mask, while the team symbol is on the other.
The only thing that really reflects him personally is his last name on the chin. The rest is all just team-based and what we thought would do the members that were lost justice.
Dow says he expects to feel strong emotions when he steps on the ice for their first game of the season. That will be on September 12th when the Broncos face the Nipawin Hawks, the same team they were scheduled to face in that playoff game the night of the crash. We're learning more tonight about the sheer force of the tornado that hit central Manitoba this weekend. A team from Environment Canada has been in the community of Alonza surveying the damage. Their early findings suggest the violent twister was on the ground for at least 20 minutes. At one point, it was 800 meters wide. Despite an alert going out to residents, some didn't receive the warning on their cell phones. And as Aaron Broman reports, that's prompting calls for change.
In an instant, everything changed for the Ollischuk's. They lost vehicles, a herd of cows, and the family shop. And now Diane Ollischuk is angry that many didn't see it coming.
Somebody, please do something. This is ridiculous.
All day, there had been severe thunderstorm warnings. The Alert Ready system sent out a tornado warning at 8:17 p.m. Most people in the Alonza area didn't get it on their cell phones. And 13 minutes later, the tornado touched down. So why didn't they hear this?
Our cell service has been gone for almost a month.
Bell MTS says it has been working on upgrading the area to a faster LTE data network. In June, it made changes to cell phone towers, which resulted in better coverage for some areas, but worse for Alonza. Most of their phones don't work.
We have people, lives destroyed all over the place here, and you can't even make a phone call to make sure someone's okay.
Natalie Hazel is a warning preparedness meteorologist with Environment Canada. When there's dangerous weather, her team works with Alert Ready. Messages get sent to everyone in harm's way.
We actually had the tornado warning out this time before the tornado had formed. So for our purposes, Alonza was a great success.
But not for people without cell coverage.
Most people got nothing. Most people were just enjoying the lake, so they weren't listening to radio, watching TV. So yeah, it's really difficult sometimes.
A 77-year-old man died when his house was destroyed. The Ollischuks have no landline and couldn't call to warn him when they saw the tornado.
Absolutely terrible. Completely devastating.
The storm was given a preliminary EF3 rating, with wind gusts between 225 and 265 kilometers an hour. Many in the community huddled in the Ollischuk's basement for safety and come together again now to mend.
A lot of cleanup.
One step at a time, one day at a time, I guess.
Aaron Broman, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We asked Bell MTS about the problem. The company says it's exploring ways to enhance service in areas of limited coverage. As for the Alert Ready system, it rolled out earlier this year. Just last week, there was a tornado warning in the Ottawa area. Some people say they didn't get the alert. That might have been due to a compatibility issue. You have to use a device with the LTE network and up-to-date software. Ahead on this evening on The National, we'll take you to London, England, a city struggling with a spike in knife-related crime. You'll hear from people affected, now determined to stop the violence. First, though, he's Canada's most successful tennis star ever. In the National interview, Milos Raonic opens up about the next generation growing up in an immigrant family and what life could look like after tennis.
But I don't believe in legacy. What would I try? I would love to be an incredible human being to the people that are close to me, the people I truly care about and love. I would love.
The world's best tennis players are in Toronto and Montreal this week for the Rogers Cup. Among them is Milos Raonic. No other Canadian singles player has ever ranked higher. And like his game, the Maple Leaf Missile has grown a lot since being named Newcomer of the Year in 2011. Raonic has struggled the last couple of years, though, and slipped in the standings. Frustrating, yes, but he says he's not fazed. Susan Ormiston caught up with the tennis star as he prepares to hold court.
Whoa.
With a killer serve.
147.
And that razor-sharp focus. Ever since he was a boy growing up in suburban Toronto, Milos Raonic is the most successful Canadian men's player ever. 4 times in the quarterfinals at Wimbledon, including a shot at the finals, he's come oh so close to winning a Grand Slam, rising to number 3 in the world in 2016. But Raonic is facing strong headwinds, injuries, forcing him off the court to recover. He's dropped to 30th in the rankings. Still, you can't dismiss this towering athlete. He's 6'5", so rather than stare up, I hopped up on a step stool. At 27, Raonic is back in Toronto home turf and remembering where it all started.
Milos, welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
It's good to
You
be
play
back.
so many tournaments. Does it feel any different coming here?
It does.
Why?
I think it's more exciting, but also it's sort of like the little kid in me. This is the only tournament I ever attended as a fan. I never got to go to any other tournaments. This was the the week throughout every year that I would practice early in the mornings, then I'd come here and just watch tennis throughout the entire day. Then I went from watching tennis to sort of being a hitting partner to playing qualies, and now being able to play in these tournaments, sort of the headline match on one of the days. So that's exciting for sure.
Tell me something, at this stage in your game, what's the most difficult challenge? Is it physical or mental?
Physically staying healthy. You know, you get an injury, you have to take the time to stop, then you have to sort of work to catch up. Hasn't been sort of a smooth transition, a smooth path. So I think that aspect of it physically and how it sort of affects you mentally, because then you start obviously questioning yourself. Is this going to be the last time you get hurt? When's the next one around the corner? That ends up being the most draining and tiring aspect.
So Wimbledon this year, disappointing for you. You with Federer out of the way, you probably looked at the semis and thought, well, I could be there. You pulled up with an injury. What did you tell yourself after that?
I guess the one blessing of being hurt, a lot of times you learn to deal with it. Just say, okay, let's heal this as quickly as possible and efficiently as possible. Make sure it's dealt with, not taking any shortcuts, not rushing it back, and then let's put in the work again.
So what was it, a quad?
It was a quad tear, yeah.
So I watched you in that news conference after Wimbledon, the quarters. You had a lot of emotion there. You were discouraged, understandably. Are you worried now that you're running out of time?
No, because there's nothing else I want to do as much as I want to play tennis and to play it well. So they don't feel like sacrifices, and I don't feel this sort of sense of time. Obviously, I'd love to be accomplishing sort of the bigger goals I have quicker, but it's not the case, but it doesn't discourage me in any way.
You're an intense guy. You've always known what you wanted to achieve, but that elusive Grand Slam win has not come your way yet. Why?
Just, there's other guys. It hasn't always been up to me. I wish I was the only guy being asked those questions, but there's a lot of guys there that are vying for the same thing. And then it's also a generation where it's, you know, 3 guys that have been quite greedy about keeping most of them to themselves. So you got to find your way, you got to find your opening, you got to find your opportunity, and you got to try to make the most of it. But I haven't been able to do that, but it hasn't discouraged me in any way. It's each time I get there, I feel closer to it than I was the time before. I feel like I'm a much better player now than I was before. I think for me, the day tennis would be difficult is the day I felt like I couldn't improve anymore. I think that would be sort of the most difficult day for me to accept, where I felt like my game was regressing.
Raonic has boosted Canada several rungs up the tennis ladder, his success spawning a new generation of players.
And we have a rare talent.
Looking to be like him, or better still, beat him. Like Denis Shapovalov, currently ranked higher, he beat Raonic this year in Madrid. Both are at the Rogers Cup this week. Raonic is the face of the tournament, and Shapovalov wants to be.
Milos, you're sort of in a sandwich generation yourself. You've got those big guns at the top, the multiple champions, and then you've got young people, even Canadians, coming up behind you. When you look at a guy like Shapovalov playing, do you analyze his game as sort of a mentor or as a formidable opponent?
I think both. That's sort of the way I've always seen tennis is if I was them, what would I want to do better? But then also if I'm playing them, what would I do to make them feel uncomfortable as possible? And all these kind of things.
Does a guy like that make you nervous?
Nervous in the sense that, you know, it's tough to play him, but it's exciting also. I think more than anything, it's an excitement for where we are, and then you sort of look at it in the realm of Davis Cup, what we can do probably all together.
Milos Raonic. There's more than one reason Raonic is a worthy sports ambassador for Canada. His personal foundation helps disadvantaged youth and has contributed to the Paralympics. He's mostly even-tempered on the court, save for the odd example of extreme frustration. And he's never forgotten his background, the youngest in an immigrant family who fled conflict in the former Yugoslavia to come to Canada.
Your foundation has done a lot for economically and physically disadvantaged kids. But they probably look at you and think, the chance of me getting where you are, that's a long shot. What do you tell these kids?
I think, you know, you have to work hard. Did I think I'd be where I am as a tennis player today? No, not by any means. Even when I decided to go pro, I think I said I hope I can be a fixture in the top 50. You can't be greedy and impatient enough to expect that, hey, if you put in the work for a week or 2 weeks, all that's going to pay off on week 3. It doesn't work that way. And I think that's one thing that people, and kids especially, shouldn't forget.
Milos, you were an immigrant family. You came here as a young boy. This country is trying to figure out how many migrants, what type of migrants we accept, invite into this country. What's your advice?
I think when people come here, they're looking for a new opportunity. That's what it was for my family. The thing that Canada's had for more, I believe, than any other place in the world is the open arms, welcome perspective, where it has felt like home for people very quickly on into their sort of venture and journey to moving to Canada. And I don't think you can forget that. I think that has to stay wide open, and it has to be accepting to people, because if it wasn't accepted to people, it would be tough, you know, taking a family like mine, you know, from a country that was just on the outbreak of war, to and giving us the opportunities they have. And I know I'm extremely grateful for it, and I know every single person in my family is as well.
What happens if you don't get that Grand Slam final?
Nothing. That's it. You know, maybe you deal with disappointment, but you move on pretty quickly.
That's pretty healthy. Do you really feel that way?
You know, would I be disappointed? Yes. Would it change my life? I think it's also the other aspect. What happens if you do? People automatically think your life changes overnight. It doesn't. Because at most, 4 months later, there's another Grand Slam and there's another Grand Slam champion, and you're forgotten about quickly. This sport moves on quickly. I don't believe in the sense of legacy that much and these kind of things. I think that...
What do you mean by that?
Generation after generation, people do get forgotten and left behind. I think you have to do something exceptional. I think Roger is somebody that's going to transcend beyond generations because of what he has been able to achieve. Because sport moves on. It's not like you're changing the world by being a good athlete. All you're doing is you're winning a little bit more than the guy before. Maybe you're breaking some record. What you do off the court can maybe change the world in a way. But being a good athlete doesn't necessarily qualify you as a life-changing person or even as a good person on its own. And, you know, one thing as an athlete, most people, their sort of prime, they're used to when it comes to their career, their work is going to be between 35 to 50. As an athlete, you're pretty much done at 35. So you have to account for, if you're averaging out 70 years of life expectancy, you got to have a new life from 35 on.
So when you finish playing tennis, do you want to stay in tennis, or what will be?
I need to do something else for a little
legacy?
bit. I don't think there will be a legacy. I think there's
Maybe
going to be
not in tennis, but what are you going to do?
I don't believe in the legacy. What would I try? I would love to be an incredible human being to the people that are close to me, the people I truly care about and love. I would love to have a good impact on the kids that I work with, on their lives in some way.
So you're incredibly even. Do you have self-doubt?
I have, always. I think it's impossible to avoid it, but I try to sort of revert to the things that I believe I do well, or I believe that I have certain abilities in, and try to make the most of it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Really
Really nice
appreciate
to
it.
meet you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rounich's first match is tomorrow in Toronto. He'll take on David Goffin of Belgium. The two have played each other 4 times before. The last time in Madrid last year, each has won twice. And as Susan mentioned, another prominent Canadian playing in this week's Rogers Cup tournament is Denis Shapovalov. They're on opposite sides of the men's draw.
For me, it's exciting to be, to be #1 in Canada right now at such a young age. It's just motivating for me to keep going and hopefully stay #1 for as long as I can.
So is there a budding rivalry underway between Canada's top 2 men's tennis stars?
What he's done for the country and for Canadian tennis has been like a lot more than I have in my career so far. So, I've been looking up to him since I've been growing up, and I still look up to him.
It's possible the two could play each other next Sunday if they both make it to the Rogers Cup final. Next on The National, tonight's dispatch from London and the grassroots effort to fight a surge in knife-related violence in that city.
The youngest case that I had of a child being inflicted with a knife wound was 6 years old.
I can't tell you the times I've turned my telly on and broken down in tears when I've seen young people losing their life.
I brought lunch. What are you doing?
Nothing.
Crime scenes like this have become a familiar sight in London, disturbing signs of a nationwide spike in knife attacks. In just 1 year, more than 40,000 knife assaults were reported in England and Wales, the highest level since statistics have been kept. In London so far this year, dozens of people have been fatally stabbed. In a moment, a possible reason for this increase and the case for a controversial countermeasure. But first, some grassroots efforts to turn the tide of violence. The CBC's Thomas Dagla has our dispatch from London.
Riding through East London with Robin Travis means retracing a path of bad memories.
I got stabbed there, a whole bunch of cars came down here. Nothing to really make a hoorah about. My mate got shot there as well in the same place I got stabbed.
This borough, Hackney, is where Travis spent his younger years and where he was drawn into violence as a teenager. The experience influences him now as an adult.
It can make you cold. It's just a reminder of what changed me as a human being. It changed my mindset.
These streets still see bloodshed, now stemming from London's so-called violent crime epidemic. Something Travis is fighting with his new weapon of choice.
You can enjoy it.
A book.
For me, this isn't a badge of honor. This isn't look at me, look at my past. No, I don't care about the past. Who cares? Any evil act I've done, I wish I could take it away.
Prisoner to the Streets is his memoir, the tale of a young man who refuses to call himself a gang member but gets caught up in a kind of warfare anyway, an all too common story. Lately, reports of knife and gun violence have flooded the news here, with bold statistics sometimes overshadowing the stories of the victims. Take Kamari Barnes, for instance. He was only 15 when he was stabbed to death last year outside his school. In court, the teenage killer said he read Robin Travis's book and wouldn't have killed had he read it before.
It hurt. It hurt because there's no bringing Kamari Barnes back. Is there a reward for me now? Well done. Your book could have done so. No, this is my whole point. If you get us in the schools, why do we wait for tragedy before we say, I told you so?
His goal is to get into schools to warn of the dangers of the life he left. And the danger is on full display. Police in London regularly seize hundreds of blades off the streets, from butcher's knives to machetes to so-called zombie knives made only to kill.
I can't tell you the times I've turned my telly on and broken down in tears when I've seen people young people losing their lives. And of course, we've got a big enough chute that the weapons can go in here.
Ex-cop Michael Smith installs special bins across London, hoping would-be attackers will throw out their weapons.
The misconception that I have to carry a knife or have to carry a gun because everyone else is, that's the mindset that we try to change.
He says hundreds are ditched in this bin alone. Agonizingly close to the site of another recent murder. Israel Agunsola was just 18 when he was killed in April. He too was stabbed by a fellow teenager. The next day, loved ones gathered to mourn their loss and painfully consider how another life could be taken so young. London city councillors can't agree why they're seeing a spike now.
Young men are using a knife to settle their differences. Many young men are leaving home with a knife, even with no relation to gangs, because initially it used to be a gangs issue, and we're finding increasingly it's not a gangs issue.
Prevention starts younger and younger. In South London, the boxing lessons are meant as a way of channeling the kids' energy.
Good boy, high five.
Keeping them occupied now to keep them off the streets later. They might not understand that yet, but Ansarullah Ahmadi does. He joined 3 years ago.
You can walk down the street and then you have to watch your back sometimes because you never know what's going to happen. You could get like hit from the back, you could get stabbed.
We've got a shot coming across here. I've defended myself because the shot's
This program's called Dwaynomics.
Good, you're doing some great stuff.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Named after the late son of Lorraine Jones. The kids keep her smiling despite what some see outside.
The youngest case that I had of a child being inflicted with a knife wound was 6 years old. Parents are saying that they're fearful of bringing their children to school.
In these streets near the boxing gym, her 20-year-old son, Dwayne Simpson, was stabbed. His mother rushed over as the paramedics tried to revive him. They failed.
He saw one of the young boys that he was training being chased by an older guy with a knife, and he went to go and help. And the judge ruled that Dwayne died a peacekeeper.
And I'm not talking like that in front of you, so why do you have to talk like that in front of me?
Back to Robin Travis.
Someone's come here to reason with you lot about real life.
He's been invited to this special school catering to students who've had trouble with authority.
In fact, before we start, young man, I'm going to ask you to take off your hood.
It's not an easy start. Sharing his own story to help these teens avoid becoming what he calls a prisoner to the streets.
I'm not talking down to you. I'm not trying to make you feel small, but this is how we'll talk to the old school me.
Maybe it's that they see themselves in him. Whatever the reason, they open up.
What age gets into prison?
And let him in.
Boy, with a C or K?
Travis feels the more lives he can touch, the better.
I can't change the world. I can't save the world. I just want to help enlighten people so they can change the world for themselves. Like, their own realities can be a better future. That's it.
Really good, man.
Your engagement helps a lot.
Travis knows where he's been and hopes to steer others away from it. It's plain to see this city is on a dangerous path. Thomas Dagler, CBC News, London.
As knife crime escalates, former London Mayor Boris Johnson has pointed to the decline of a controversial police tactic. Stop and search lets officers search people on the street if there were reasonable grounds to suspect they had weapons, illegal drugs, or items to be used to commit a crime. The practice was curtailed a few years ago over concerns that it didn't really work and it seemed to unduly target young black men. Now, the current London mayor, Sadiq Khan, has thrown his support behind a targeted forum of stop and search. He's also called for an increase in police budgets. Up next on The National, a high school teacher's record-setting trip across the Atlantic is our moment of the day.
One night I was out rowing a little bit later and the water was just rich with this luminescent plankton.
I brought lunch. What are you doing?
Nothing.
Here's a look at some of the stories we're watching this week on The National. Ontario Premier Doug Ford expected to announce on Tuesday that Buck a Beer is coming back to Ontario. The change is expected to come into effect by Labor Day. While it will lower the minimum price of a bottle or can by a quarter, it doesn't force brewers to lower prices. Buck a Beer was one of Ford's campaign promises. And on Wednesday, we'll be watching as Dustin Duthie appears in a Calgary courtroom. He's accused of killing his girlfriend, mother, and stepfather. A forensic psychologist is expected to say whether Duthie needs a psychological assessment.
We just felt like we had to do something. And the only thing that we know how to do is to throw shows and spread love.
On Saturday, Billy Talent will host a benefit concert in Toronto. Proceeds will go to the victims of the Danforth shooting. Tickets sold out in mere minutes last week and then appeared on resale websites for as much as 10 times the original price. 3 of those websites, though, removed the tickets after being contacted by CBC Toronto. Now to an incredible journey that started 39 days ago. Bryce Carlson left the shores of St. John's, Newfoundland, bound for the UK. His goal, beat the world record for the quickest solo row across the Atlantic. This weekend he made it, and we asked him what his best and worst day on the water was. His record-setting trip is our moment of the day.
I set out to have an adventure, to share that adventure with the world. I had some very strong winds coming directly out of the south. And because I was getting closer and closer to England, maintaining my course was becoming more and more critical. I had 13-foot swells and 6-foot waves. I'm rowing, I have waves crashing over my shoulder. Several times waves knocked me off my seat. That was a very, very stressful day. One night I was out rowing a little bit later and the water was just rich with this luminescent plankton. And I was listening to some dance music, and every stroke that my blades hit the water just lights up with these plankton. So it felt like I was in this like dance club where I'm out. I'm a little bit disoriented. Great, with great music and lights, and I think that was a really fun, special moment for me.
But a lot of times, I'm sure there weren't fun, special moments. But what an incredible feat. And it's worth noting the role Newfoundland plays in a lot of these cross-Atlantic adventures over the years, from the first wireless signal to famous flights, and now a single rower setting the record across the Atlantic. That is the National for Sunday, August the 5th. Good night.